Many native Californian legends report that the Death Valley is home to an advanced culture that lives beneath the scorching sand of the desert. On the edge of the world, this area is said to be inhabited by the so-called Havmusuvs. But who are the Havmusuvs, and what do they do there? Only the statement of an Indian Paiute, a descendant of an ancient American civilization, can reveal more about this amazing secret. The American magazine on paranormal phenomena, Fate magazine, published an article in its September 1949 issue entitled Tribal Memories of the Flying Saucers, an interview with a Navajo Indian who calls himself Ogamaki. This story is based on the tribal legend that describes one of America's most enigmatic and secret stories. It begins in the middle of the Mojave Desert in California, the area where the native coyotes lived, thousands of years before the first Europeans arrived on the continent. Ogamaki describes this as follows. Most of you who read this are probably white men. From a bloodline they have only been carrying outside Europe for a century or two. You talk in your newspapers about flying saucers or mysterious ships as something new, as if they were something strange from the 20th century. What else can you think? But if you had red skin and the blood that has been born and lived on this earth for thousands and thousands of years, you would know that this is not true. You would know that your ancestors, who have lived in these mountains and prairies for countless generations, have seen these ships before. The story became a legend, the unwritten story of your people. Don't you believe that? Well, why should you? Because the storytellers of my people know that you don't believe or even want to believe such things. They have kept their lips shut and never shared this knowledge. But now that the ships have been sighted again, is it wise to withhold our knowledge about this ancient people? Some of the wise men of my people have spoken, and if you are interested, I invite you to sit with us and listen. Let's say we meet tonight at the peculiar place white men call Death Valley. The old chieftain smoked the pipe while manifesting these truths, which are part of the Paiute tradition. His people inhabited Inyo County, the Panamint Mountains, and Death Valley, centuries before the arrival of the white men. Nowadays, the white man calls it Valley of Death, but the Paiute call it Tomesha, which means the land of fire. You're asking me if we knew about the big silver airships even before the white man brought his railroad cars into the country? We, the Paiute Nation, have known about these ships for countless generations. We also believe that we know something about the people who control them. They are called Havmusuvs. The Havmusuvs are a people of the Panamint and are as old as Tomesha itself. The Havmusuvs are beautiful people. Their skin has a golden hue, and they wear long dark hair, which they tie together with a ribbon on their head. They always dress in a white, finely woven piece of clothing, which they wear draped like a toga on a shoulder. They protect their feet with sandals. Don't you understand? Of course not. You're not a Paiute. Now listen carefully. I will lead you back to the roots of the dark past. When the world was young, this valley, now a dry desert, was once a lush port on the edge of a sea of blue water that stretched from the mountains to the Gulf of California. It is said that the Havmusuvs came here in giant rowing ships. they found large caves in the Panamint Mountains, where they also built their city. The Havmusuvs ruled the sea with their fast rowboats, trading with faraway peoples from all over the world, and brought foreign goods to the great docks that are said to still exist in the caves today. Then, after countless centuries, the climate began to change. The water in the lake began to dry up, so that there was no more access to the open sea. Finally, the day came when only a dry crust of the big blue lake was still there. Then came the desert, and the god of fire began to walk over Tomeja, the land of the blazing earth. When the Havmusuvs could no longer use their large rowing boats, they began to think about other means to travel the infinite vastness of this world. We know that they had begun to use flying canoes. At first, these silver-colored ships with wings were not particularly large, and moved with a quiet hum and fluttered like an eagle. However, the past centuries have also brought about other changes. Tribe after tribe swept across the land, fought for a while to take possession of it, and passed again like a sandstorm. In their mountain city, which was located in the caves, the Havmusuvs lived in peace, far away from any conflicts. Sometimes they were seen from afar in their flying ships, or riding snow-white animals. They moved from cliff to cliff. We had never seen these strange animals before. For the Havmusuvs, the course of the centuries brought only the appearance of larger ships, which could move even more quietly. I've never had the opportunity to meet a Havmusuv in person, but we've heard many stories about them. But there are also certain reasons why you shouldn't be too curious. These strange people are in possession of weapons. One of them is a small tube, which numbs everyone with the piercing feeling, like a rain of cactus needles. This makes you unable to move for hours, and the mysterious people use this time to disappear into the cliffs. Another weapon is lethal. It is a long silver tube. If it is pointed at you, instant death follows.
Has any peyote ever spoken to a Havmusuv? Or were the peyotes already here when the big rowing ships first appeared?
Yes, once in the not-too-distant past, but before the arrival of the Spaniards, a peyote chief lost his bride due to a sudden death. In his great and overwhelming grief, he wanted to follow her, and thought of the Havmusuvs and their long death tubes. So, he said goodbye to his people and went in search of them. No one appeared until the chief began to climb the dangerous cliffs of the Panamint Mountains. Then, he suddenly met one of the men, dressed in white with the long silver tubes. He was told to return to the place he had come from, but the chief made him understand that he wanted to die. The man in white gave him a long pipe, and other Havmusuvs appeared. They started talking to each other in a foreign language, and looked at the chieftain thoughtfully. Finally, they made it clear to him that they would take him with them. Many weeks after his people had declared him dead, the peyote chieftain returned to his settlement. He said he had been in the mysterious huge underground city of the Havmusuvs, where white lights burn day and night and never go out, because they have unlimited fuel. There he learned the language and history of these mysterious people, and taught them the language and legends of the peyote. He wanted to stay there forever, but was advised to return, to use his new knowledge to help his people. Do you believe the chief's story? I don't know. When a human loses his way and ends up in Tomeja, and the fire god walks over the salt crust, strange dreams cloud the spirit. No one can breathe the hot breath of the fire god, and stay healthy for a long time. He asked me to tell the others the legend of the flying ships. I told him what the young men of the tribe don't know, because they can't hear the stories of the past anymore. Now, if you ask me if I should believe him, turn around, look behind you at the wall of the Panamint Mountains. How many huge caves could emerge there, hidden by the lights and shadows of the rocks? How many could open outwards or inwards and never be seen behind the peaks? How many ships could roam through summer nights far away from the white man's eyes, like an eagle when the fire of the sand is extinguished? How many Musuvs could live in their impenetrable fortress, in eternal peace, far from the noise of white men's weapons? This has always been a country full of secrets. Nobody can change that. Not even the white man with his flying engines. Because if they get too close to the walls of the Panamints, a sharp wind can turn them like a flying arrow. Tomasha hides its secrets well, even in winter. But no man can interfere when the god of fire pulls the hot veil of his breath through his footprints. As extraordinary as it may seem, the Paiute tribe is not the only one to have stories of intraterrestrial beings in its oral traditions. Just like other peoples of the American continent, these have their own stories, which are hard to believe, but on the other hand, seem quite real.
Hey, it's Mike. It's the Lord of Ord, the Fortean digital shaman. Gonna do some more reading out of Passport to MAGONIA on UFOs, folklore, and parallel worlds. Jacques Vallée. We're now on page 71. The Magic Casement. This Reverend Robert Kirk sounds like an interesting fellow. He was at one time when he was around. Anyways, makes no bones about it. The elves did at one time occupy the land. Today it is still a common belief in the north of Scotland, and the Sith, our fairy people, existed once. A belief that survives in their title, Good Neighbors, although I could occasionally be hostile. They could be occasionally be hostile to men. While the Sith had no inborn antagonism towards human beings and were occasionally known to do good turns to their favorites, they were very quick to take offense. Capricious in their behavior and delighted in playing tricks on their mortal neighbors. These cantrips had to be patiently endured. I never saw that word cantrips. You guys ever heard of them before? Let's find out what that is all about. Cantrips, a magic spell of any kind. Cantrips are one which reads the same forwards and backwards. It can also be a witch's trick or a sham. The word cantrip. I can't seem to type.
cantrip, cantrip,
Well, this says canned rip.
cantrip,
Canned rip. Okay. Canned rip. Not cantrip. Oh, well, we live and learn, don't we? These cantrips had to be patiently endured as resistance or hostility might lead to dreadful reprisals, the kidnapping of children or even adults. An attitude of passive friendliness on the human side was therefore assumed to be eminently desirable. Scott refers to this when Bally, Nicole Jarvie, and Rob Roy tells his companion as they pass a ferry hill near Aberfoyle. They cant them Daoine Sith, which signifies, as I understand, men of peace, meaning thereby to make their goodwill, and we may in as well catch them that too. Mr. Osbol this stone, for there's not good in speaking ill o' laird within his and bounds. All right, I push that. A Gaelic scholar, Campbell, minister of Tyree, published a story called Na Am Who's Geen, I guess, the dwarfs or pygmies, in which he remarks the existence of pygmies in some unknown region bordering upon, if not forming part of, the kingdom of coldness, is of interest as indicating some of the connection between smallness of person and cold climate, and so leading to the speculation that as to the first dispersion of the human race and connection of tribes that are now far removed from each other in appearance, dress, mode of life, and dialects. Although the connection between climate and size is not a tenable hypothesis. Campbell's remarks do open the way to interesting speculations. He notes that the term la panach applies, I think pronounce it lap panach. Natch? I don't know. The panach applies to a certain little thick-set, insignificant man who figures in many tales, and he adds, there are many traditional tales in the Highlands of much interest, in which little men of dwarfish and even pygmy size figure as good bowmen, slaying men at large size and powerful make by their dexterity in the use of the bow and arrow. In spite of their small size, they are understood to have been a very considerable strength. They were not undersized in the same way that children are, but full-grown individuals, undersized and sinew, or muscular. These dwarfs or pygmies are called na am hushjin, or more correctly, na ha am hushjin. Okay, if I said it right. The English phonetics for the Gaelic am hushjin would be a whisk. So of course it would be. So to pronounce it would be Hawisk. I don't know how you get that, but okay. The same beings are sometimes found under the name Tam Hogsk or Hogsk and Hamush. And these words informally designate dwarfs. Oh, these words formally designate dwarfs. And it is ironic, therefore, that in one talk, the lady with the skin garments quoted by McDougall, the Awisks address a human intruder as "oh little man," while he in turn calls them big men all. Now, one point must absolutely be clear up. Were there or were there not races of dwarfs living among the West and Middle Europeans of antiquity? Were the legends about the fairies and the elves based on the fact that the ancient inhabitants of the northern parts of the British Isles were such a race? Historical and archaeological researchers definitely say no, and we must agree with them. Yet several writers, such as David McRitchie, is that right? McRitchie? I'm going to call him McRitchie. Claim there are indications in this direction, and of the course of such indications would be crucial to any theory concerning nature of the humanoids. In the book published in London in 1894, Tyson's essay concerning the pygmies of the ancients, Professor Windle of Birmingham remarks that a race of dwarves supplied the best warriors and bodyguards for several kings. Tyson made an extensive study of the dwarf race and quotes the Greek historian Tacitus. In Middle India had black men who are called pygmies, using the same language as the other Indians. Of these pygmies, the king of the Indians has 3,000 in his train, for they are very skillful archers. And he adds, there seems to have been near Lake Zura in Persia, Negrato pygmy black tribes who are probably aboriginal and may have formed the historic black guard of the ancient kings of Susania. Tyson's work, to which Windle provided the preface, was written in the 17th century. After calling attention to the remark of Tacitus, it goes on. Talatonius and Bartholine, I guess it would be Bartholine, think that what Tacitus relates of the pygmies as their being very good archers very well illustrates the text of Ezekiel. The Ezekiel text in question appears thus in the King James Bible: the men of Arvad with thin army were upon thy walls round about, and the Gammadims were in their towers. The Geneva translation, printed in Edinburgh in 1579, also has Gammadimes, glossed valorous men. In the Vulgate, however, it runs thus: Filii avard cum exercitu tu supra moros tus per circumtum et pygmae and terribus tias ferent. Jesus. Indeed, the English bishops' Bible in 1572 and 1575 does not have gammadimes, but pygmalions. So pygmalions, that's what it is. Without going into further detail, it is clear that the Gaelic story of a guard of dwarf warriors is not an isolated case. If we return now to David MacRitchie's quotation from the Flemish folklore journal Ons Volksleven, we can learn more. The Finlanders, a race dwelling in our country prior to the Celts, were little but strong, dexterous, good swimmers. They lived by hunting and fishing. Adam and Birmingham in the 11th century thus pictures their descendants or race. They had large heads, flat faces, flat nose, and a large mouth. They lived in caves in the rocks, which they quitted in the nighttime for the purpose of committing sanguinary outrages. The Celtic people, and later those of the German race, so tall and strong, could hardly look upon such little folks as human beings. They must have regarded them as strange, mysterious creatures. And when these Negroes and Finlanders had lived for a long enough time hidden, for fear of the new people, in their grottos, especially when they at length fell into decay through poverty or died out, they became changed in the imagination of the dreamy Germans into mysterious beings, a kind of ghosts or gods. In a footnote, MacRitchie states that he is not aware on what grounds this author speaks of them as black people, but he admits that these dwarfish Finlanders might be regarded as the original of the Awisk of the Gaelic legend. Now we seem to be getting somewhere. There is a tradition in the Orkney Islands, I guess that's how you pronounce it, would be Orkney Islands, that offers a parallel to the above story. Sometimes in the first part of the 15th century, Bishop Thomas Tulloch of Orkney gave details, and the Orcandibus Insularis, of the tradition of the archipelago had been inhabited 6 centuries earlier by the Pepe, are a race of dwarves. The Pepe, according to many scholars, were the Irish priests. The dwarves were the Picts, Picts, and this MacRitchie follows Barry's Orkney, where we read, "They are plainly no other than the Picts, the Scandinavian writers, generally called the Picts Piti or pets. One of them uses the term Petia instead of Pictland, Saxogram, I guess maybe Saxon grammar. And besides the firth that divides Orkney from Caithness, is usually dominated Petland Fjord and the Icelandic saga or histories. Reading this book makes me feel pretty stupid. Anyways, the consistency running through these ancient accounts, McRitchie says, is indeed remarkable. The Irish priest followed St. Columba, who himself was a great-grandson of Conall Golban, who, tradition states, had fierce battles with a race of dwarves. Conall Goblin's fights with the dwarves, indeed, are the origin of the series of tales sometimes attributed to other legendary heroes. If we try to get as close as possible to the original story, this is what we get. Conall Golban was a son of the famous Niall, the ancestor of the O'Neills of Ulster. He was the paternal grandfather of Fedlimid's, the father of St. Columba. His adventures begins in the northwest of Ireland, somewhere in the dawn of the 5th century. After various experiences, Golban landed in the realms of Lochlann, generally believed to be Scandinavia, which itself had a rather vague meaning at the time. There, Golban was intrigued by a strange construction and asked his guide, "What pointed house is there?" Dunach? Question mark. And there is a house of the Temhage, the best warriors that are in the realm of Lochlann. Dunach, the guide, replied, "I heard my grandfather speaking about the Temhage," and said Conall, "but I have never seen them. I will go to see them." "It were not my counsel to thee," were Dunach's last words. This advice, naturally, Conall Golban disregarded. He went straight to the palace of the king of Lochlann and challenged him to combat. He was told that he should get no fighting at that time of night, but he should get lodgings in the house of the Awisk, where there were 1,800 amhus, 18 score, and he went in, and there were none of the amhus within that did not grin. When he saw that they had made a grin, he himself made two. "What was the meaning of your grinning at us?" said the Whisks. "And what was the meaning of your grinning at me?" said Cornell. Said they, "Our grinning at thee meant that thy fresh royal blood will be ours to quench our thirst, and thy fresh royal flesh to polish our teeth." And it said Cornell, "The meaning of my grinning is that I will look out for the one with the biggest knob and slenderest shanks, and knock out the brains of the rest with one. His brains will with the knobs of the rest." At this point, each of the Whisks put a stake of wood against the door, and Cornell asked them why they had done so. "We have never seen coming here one a gulp of whose blood or a morsel of whose flesh could reach us, but thou thyself except one other man, and he fled from us. And now every one is doubting the other in the case thou shouldest flee. That was the thing that made me do it myself likewise, since I have got yourself so close as you are," answered Cornell, who had followed their lead in this action. Then he went and began upon them. "I fear to be chasing you from hole to hole and from hill to hill." I did that. Then he gazed at them from one to two. He seized on one of the slenderest shanks and the fattest head. He drove upon the rest. Latched till, I don't know if I'm saying any of these words right. Where we at now? Where the hell is Silatched? He seized one of the slender shanks and the fattest heads and drove it upon the rest. Siloch sledged till he had killed every one of them. He had not a jot of the one with whom he was working at them, but what was in his hands of the shanks. The tale of Cornel Goban, recorded by Campbell of Islay, continues with many wonderful fights in other lands. In France, for example, Cornel wins in the same absurd way over. The house of the Tam is the best warriors the King of France had, McRitchie concluded. It is, of course, to be understood that the passage at it stands is as impossible as it is ludicrous. But this does not interfere with the assumption that the basis of the story, and then I can't read that, something, whatever, for some reason it's blocked out, or it's got a symbol or something. Anyways, actual encounter between men of tall stature and the race of dwarves, that excessive numbers of the latter, and the case will lie I don't know what that means, which the hero swings them about, being merely the embroidering of Gaelic letters and the letter times. For as for the seeming impossibility that the whatever could be transmitted for 15th century and yet be historical, Ricci adds, it ought to be remembered that the oral transmission of history and genealogy, with the most careful attention and language and details, was a perfect science among the Gaelic-speaking peoples. But then, what became of the dwarfish race? According to McRitchie, the dwarfs were destroyed or went into hiding toward the 6th century, when Columbia and something else, maybe it's Cornell, that's probably what I was trying to say, followers carried on a religious war against the Picts. At the same time, he says that Irishmen were also using force against the same people in the north of Ireland. And since the new owners of the land felt for their ancient enemies a mixture of guilt and fear, numerous rumors were born concerning the ghosts of the Picts still roaming through the land, and this is turn led to the elves and the fairies. This theory, generally referred to as the pygmy theory, is however now no longer tenable in the face of the evidence historians have gathered about the Picts. The name Pixie, according to Wainwright, appears first in 279 AD, and from that time on, it is applied to all the peoples who lived north of the Antonine Wall. Antonine Wall, I guess that's how it is pronounced. And we're not Scots. In the earlier times, we are really concerned with the predecessors of the Picts, who formed various groups called Proto-Picts. Could McRitchie's Pygmies have figured among the Proto-Picts? Wainwright gives the following translation of a passage from historic, fuck if I know how to pronounce that word, Lorwiginiae. We just call it historical, whatever. It's HLORWEGIAE. I don't know if you pronounce the H or you pronounce the L, or do you even pronounce one? I don't know. Lorwiginiae? Horwingiae? Also referred to as the two above. These islands were first inhabited by the Picts, and the Pepe of these one race, the Picts, little exceeded pygmies in stature. They did marvels in the mornings and in evenings in building walled towns, but midday they entirely lost all their strength and lurked through fear in little underground houses. And Wainwright comments, the story is interesting and it brings together Picts, Souterrains, and perhaps brooches, I guess, at once explaining the common belief that Picts were pygmy people, and providing an early example of the mistaken equations implicit in the names Picts houses, souterrains, and Pictish towers, brooches. So if I'm saying those were right, but this is remind me of what? Whatever it's reminding you of, as difficult as to hear me read this, is Lord of Rings, doesn't it? And the Hobbits. That's probably where we got the idea from. Should we believe that among the Proto-Picts there were dwarves who were mistaken for a native people? And then where did they come from? McRitchie's theory offers only confusion, and it is amusing to others his embarrassment when he must report that the Finlanders were not only dwarfish but black too. Could it be that there were Gauls in North Europe at the dawn of recorded history? I believe we have at least established that there were open questions in the minds of the scholars of all epochs concerning such beings, and on this point Heartland docs not disagree with McRitchie. Nothing is more likely than the transfer to the mystical beings of the Celtic superstitions of some features derived from the alien races. In his conclusion to his discussion of the pygmy theory, which he rejected as Heartland does, Wentz remarks that it leaves all the problems of the historical origins of the fairy faith unsolved, since it is clearly global and not limited to the Celtic islands. Thus, A. Lang, in his introduction to the 1922 edition of Kirk's book, states that, to my mind at least, the subterranean inhabitants of Mr. Kirk's book are not so much a traditional recollection of real dwarfish race living underground, a hypothesis of Sir Walter Scott's, as lingering memories of the Chthonian beings, the ancestors. Yeah, well, I live in Ohio, and I don't meet people that talk this way, so none of us in Ohio use these words that I know of. I never had a conversation with anybody talking this way, using Celtic words and old Scottish words and French words, and I never even heard of this stuff until I'm just reading this stuff. Folklore in the making. No matter how interesting it may be to speculate on the origin of these ancient beliefs, the opportunity to observe folklore in the making is even more attractive to those with an inclination toward research. When modern rumors appear to fall into the very same patterns that have puzzled generations of scientists, theologians, and literary scholars, the feeling one gets is a mixture of gratitude and enthusiasm. When the phone rings in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and a local intelligence officer transmits the observation of a motorist who has just been buzzed by what he describes as a flying saucer, we are really witnessing the unique conjunction of the modern world with its technology and ancient terrors, with all the power of their sudden, fugitive, and rational nature. We are in a very privileged position. Neither Wentz nor Heartland was able to interview people who had just observed the phenomena they studied. Most of the witnesses spoke of days gone by, of stories heard by the fireplace. We feel, on the other hand, that we can also reach out into the night and grab those lurking entities. We are hot on their trail. The air is still vibrating with excitement. The smell of sulfur is still there when the story is recorded. Take, for instance, the story of the Air Force colonel who was driving at night on a lonely Illinois road when he noticed that a strange object was flying above his car. It looked, he said, like a bird, but it was the size of a small airplane. It flapped its wings and flew away. This is the type of horror story adolescent girls sometimes tell their mothers when they come home late and a bit nervous. But an Air Force colonel? During November through December 1966, West Virginia was plagued by a similar bird called the Mothman by imaginative reporters. One witness, 25-year-old Thomas Urey, who lives in Clarksburg, met the creature at 7:15 a.m. on November 25, 1966. Everything always happened that year. And a lot of rituals must have been going on that year. In the vicinity of Point Pleasant. It was a large gray thing which rose from a nearby field. It came up like a helicopter and veered over my car. He told John Keel, who spent many days in the area investigating the reports. He accelerated up to 75 miles per hour, but the bird was still there, casually circling the car. It appeared to be about 6 feet long, with the wingspread of 8 to 10 feet, according to other witnesses quoted by Keel. The figure had large, round, glowing red eyes. On January 12, 1967, Mrs. McDaniel saw the bird herself in the broad daylight. She was outside her home when she observed what appeared to be a small plane flying down the road almost at treetop level. As it drew closer, she realized it was a man-shaped object with wings. It swooped low over her head and circled a nearby restaurant before going out of sight. Mrs. McDaniel, who works in the Point Pleasant unemployment office, is known in the community as a rational and responsible person. Now consider this report. The intruder was tall, thin, and powerful. He had a prominent nose and bony fingers with immense power which resembled claws. He was incredibly agile. He wore a long flowing cloak of the sort affected by opera goers, soldiers, and strolling actors. On his head was a tall metallic seeming helmet. Beneath the cloak were close-fitting garments of some glittering material like oilskin or metal mesh. There was a lamp strapped on his chest. Oddest of all, the creature's ears were cropped and pointed like those of an animal. Was it a prankster in a Batman dress? It seems entirely possible, especially when we take into account the fact that the bird was carrying something on his back and made incredible leaps and actually flying on one occasion above the heads of would-be captors. Would-be captors. Sorry. There is only one trouble with this explanation. The latter episode took place not in West Virginia in 1966, but in the dark lanes of a London suburb in November 1837. Like the Mothman of Point Pleasant, the mysterious flying man of London was ignored by authorities as long as possible. Finally, a resident of Peckham wrote a letter to Lord Mayor, and the censorship would no longer be maintained. Nightly, horse patrols searched the countryside. Admiral Codrington set up a reward fund, still unclaimed, by the way, and J. Viner, in a remarkable article about the mystery, informs us that even the old Duke of Wellington himself set holsters at his saddle bow and rode out after dark in search of the spring-heeled Jack. Spring-heeled Jack. On February 20th, 1838, a girl of 18, Jane Alsop of Old Ford near Bow, London, heard a violent ringing of the front doorbell. Going out, she faced the most hideous appearance of the spring-heeled Jack. He wore shiny garments and a flashing lamp on his chest, of course, like an orb. It's like they're projecting something. They're projecting an image. His eyes resemble glowing balls of fire, like orbs. When Miss Alsop uttered a cry, the intruder grabbed her arm and claw-like fingers, but the girl's sister rushed to her rescue. The visitor spurted a fiery gas at Jane's face, and she dropped unconscious. Then Jack fled, dropping his cloak, which was picked up at once by another shadow who ran after him. Another shadow, huh? 2 days earlier, though, not revealed until after the Old Ford incident had made headlines, Miss Scales of Limehouse was walking through Green Dragon Alley. The alley was a dim-lit passage beside the public house, and when she saw a tall figure lurking in the shadows, Miss Scales hesitated, waiting for her sister, who had fallen behind. The sister who described the lawyer as tall, thin, and save-marked gentlemanly, came up in time to see his long cloak thrown aside and a lantern flashing on this startled girl. There was no time to scream. Jack's weird blue flame spurted into his victim's face, and she dropped to the ground in a deep swoon. Whereupon Jack walked away calmly. Viner suggests that Jack had a rendezvous in Green Dragon Alley and wanted to get rid of the witnesses. A week after the Old Ford incident, he knocked on the door of Mr. Ashworth's house on Turner Street and inquired for him. The servant who opened the door screamed the place down. Jack fled. He was never seen again in the London neighborhood, at least. Had a contact been made, it is strange indeed, as Viner remarks, that Spring Hill Jack should have paid 2 visits within 2 days, 2 houses less than a mile apart, whose owners were named Alsop and Ashworth, respectively. 2 of the main witnesses, as in West Virginia, were young girls. With them in the 2 cases were their sisters. There seems to be a pattern here, but rather typically it is once again an absurd one. In 1877, wearing tight garments and shiny helmets, Jack was seen again at Aldershot, Hampshire, England. On that occasion, he flew above 2 sentries who fired at him. He answered with a burst of blue fire, which left them stunned and vanished. Viner believes that Jack was again to blame for the scare in late August of 1944 in Mattoon, Illinois. He was seen at night peering through the windows as in search for someone known for him by sight. Most of the witnesses were women. Some of them reported falling unconscious after a device was pointed at them by the visitor, who left a strange coiling smell. I don't know what coiling means, but maybe repulsive, or I don't know. In the spring of 1960, Italian jeweler Salvatore Sinensi was driving in Sicily near Syracuse when a small being in shiny clothes wearing a diving helmet appeared in the beam of the headlights. It had no arm but 2 little wings. Mr. Sinensi it's not spelled right. It's S-U, then capital E, then E-R-E-D. So maybe he suffered a nervous shock. On Saturday, November 16, 1963, we're walking near, 4 teenagers were walking near Sandling Park near Hythe, Kent, England. One of the 4, 17-year-old John Flexton, described how they were frightened by an object which they first had taken to be a star. It was uncanny. The reddish yellow light was coming out of the sky at an angle of 60 degrees. As it came towards the ground, it seemed to hover more slowly. A bright light, golden in color, suddenly appeared in the field near them after the first object had been hidden by some trees. It was about 18 yards away, floating about 10 feet above the ground. It seemed to move along with us, stopped when we stopped, as if it was observing us. And it sounds like people when they're out there in the field researching at night for Bigfoot, and they hear things walking with them, right? Or people that talk about it when they're in the woods alone or with a group of people, and the same experience happens. They hear the walking. They don't see the creature or being doing it, though. The light was oval, about 15 to 20 feet across, with a bright, solid core. It disappeared behind trees, and a few seconds later a dark figure shambled out. It was all black, about the size of a human, but without a head. It seemed to have wings like a bat on either side and came stumbling towards us. We didn't wait to investigate. Folklore is making from the Farfadets, and I don't know if I'm pronounced that right, but it's Farfadets. And we read about it before, and God, if you don't have to read the other one. We have drifted to modern times with Spring-Heeled Jack and the Mothman, and we have seen our visitors' arsenal become more precise. Jack's lantern and ray gun have survived in modern tales and the 20th century comic books and television series. But the real question is, could all this be real? And if not, how can we explain the consistency of these descriptions at a time when there were no comics and no television? The Italian artist R.L. Johannes, if I pronounce it right, had a remarkable experience in 1947 at the time when the name flying saucers were already popular in the United States, but when the now abundant documentation about the landings was non-existent. The date was, as he recalls, August 14. He was hiking alone, following a small stream in the mountainous region between Italy and Yugoslavia. Of course. Among some rocks, he suddenly saw a large, brilliant red lens-shaped object about 10 yards in diameter. Close to it, he discovered two people whom he first regarded as kids until he realized they were dwarfs of a type he had never seen before. The two beings were under 3 feet tall. Their heads were larger than a man's head, and they had no hair, eyelashes, or eyebrows. Their faces were greenish, and their noses straight, their mouths wide slits, giving them something of an appearance of a fish. Their eyes were huge, round, and prominent. Their color, yellow-green. The skin around their eyes formed rings rather than eyelids. As Johannes moved, one of the beings touched his belt. At once, from the center of the belt, something like a ray or a puff of vapor were emitted. Johannes experienced something like an electrical discharge and found himself on the ground, helpless and very weak. It took all his energy to turn his head around and observe the two beings as they walked away. A moment later, they were gone. In 1965, a case very similar to Johannes was reported to the U.S. Air Force, and we tried in vain to get an active investigation of the Project Blue Book. By Project Blue Book. Finally, the case was leaked at my suggestion to a civilian group which conducted a speedy and careful study of the testimony given by the only witness, a Mr. S. The details of the testimony are available in an excellent book by the leaders of the civilian group, the Lorenzens. So I need not discuss all the circumstances of the observation. Some remarks concerning the case called by the Lorenzens. The most spectacular report we have examined, a relevant and the present context, however, are relevant at the present context. However, the incident took place on September 4th, 1964, in the mountains of Northern California, about 8 miles from Cisco Grove. Mr. S. had been hunting when he became separated from a party and lost his way. The night was falling, so he lighted some fires to call attention to his position. Soon Lai observed a light in the sky, which he thought was a helicopter looking for him. When it stopped and hovered silently nearby, however, he realized it was an unusual object and climbed a large tree to observe the situation for that vantage point. The light circled the tree. S saw a flash and a dark object falling to the ground. Next he noticed one figure crashing through the woods below him and another moving in from a slightly different direction. Both figures approached the tree and looked at him. They were a little over 5 feet tall. The witnesses estimates a clothed in silver uniform that covered their heads. A third creature appeared later, behaving more like a mechanical being than an animal or a man. It was darker and had 2 reddish orange eyes. It had no mouth, but rather a slit-like opening that would drop open like an oven door. For the rest of the time S was conscious. The entities used a variety of means to try to get him to fall from his tree. He managed to keep them away by throwing lighted bits of paper and clothing at them, to which they reacted in fear. The main weapon used against him was a very curious one. If we are to believe this report, the robot-like entity would let its lower jaw drop and then place its hand inside the rectangular cavity thus revealed and emit a puff of smoke in S's direction. The smoke would spread like a mist. Upon reaching him, it would make him lose consciousness for a certain time. The effect of it was comparable to being suddenly deprived of oxygen, S said. It is hard to believe the story. Would not such a beings as he describes be able to climb the tree? If they came out of a flying saucer, why would they not fly up to his refuge? But it is equally difficult to prove that he simply had a nightmare. The witness is not given to such behavior, and when he woke up at dawn, still tied to the tree with his belt, all the objects he had dropped in an effort to get rid of the intruders were still lying around. Furthermore, there is a description of a strange, powerful gas which plays such an important role in the story as it does in the incidents related to Spring Hill Jack, the Johannes sighting, and Sonny Desverger's case in August 1952. According to Captain Ruppelt's report of his investigations in Florida, Desverger's a scoutmaster who went into the woods to investigate a strange light and faced, he said, a horrible being who looked at him from the turret of a flying machine unlike anything he had ever seen, and found himself breathing the same peculiar gas. Take a little break. See how long we're doing this. I'm sure we're just about done here, but I'm going to take a little break and come back to it. froze where he stood and noticed a small ball of red fire began to drift towards him. As it floated down, it expanded into a cloud of red mist. He dropped his light and machete and pointed his arms over his face as the mist enveloped him and lay passed out. This is confirmed by the unpublished memorandum written by Ruppelt on September 12, 1952. Upon his return from West Palm Beach, Captain Ruppelt and Lieutenant R.M. Olson began their investigation of a conference with Captain Corney. Wing Intelligence OE, I guess it's supposed to be officer, but it's spelled OECER. So, intelligence officer with the 1707th Air Base Wing on the morning of September 9th. The conference was held with Captain Corney to determine whether or not there had been any late developments in this case that the two ATIC officers were not familiar with. Captain Corney stated that officers were not familiar with. Captain Corney stated that, to his knowledge, there was nothing outstanding that had happened. He was asked about the facts of supposedly anonymous threatening telephone calls that Mr. Desventures had received. He stated that Desventures had recalled him approximately 2 weeks earlier, or 2 weeks ago, and stated that he had been receiving anonymous threatening telephone calls while at work in the establishment which he was employed. The gist of the calls was telling Desventures to lay off of his story, and that if he didn't, he would be sorry, and several other things. Not much attention was given to this claim, however, and Ruppelt continued his investigations by interviewing people who knew the scoutmaster, and especially the members of the scout group who were with him in the car when he decided to go into the woods. He gave the boys instructions to go get help if he wasn't back in 10 minutes, and started in the woods. The boys claimed that they could see his flashlight going back into the woods. From this point on, the boys' stories varied to a certain degree. The first boy states that he did not see the first light that Devonshire saw. However, shortly afterwards, after Devonshire had got out and made the statement about flying saucers and got back into the automobile, he looked out of the window and saw a semicircle of white lights about 3 inches in diameter going down at an angle of 45 degrees into the trees. None of the other Boy Scouts saw this. He then states that he saw Devonshires go back into the woods, and that the next thing that he saw was a series of red lights in the clearing. As soon as he saw the red lights, he claims that he saw Sonny stiffen up and fall. According to other boys, they both saw Defingers going through the woods, could see flashlights flashing on the trees, and then he disappeared for a few seconds, and at least the light disappeared. The next thing they saw was a series of red lights. They said they looked at a lot for it looked like flares or sky rockets. The lights were not making any definite pattern. Some of them were going up and some of them were going down, or going around and around in all directions. It just seemed to be a type of 6 or 8 red lights going in all directions. This time they ran down the road to get help. Here we have confirmation from witnesses of the observation of red lights. The witnesses were not close enough, however, to experience the light's effects. But it is interesting to remark that the lights kept going around and around after the scoutmaster, according to his own account of the incident, was already unconscious. It is also interesting to note in this connection that over a century ago, Leroux de Ligny and his Livre des Legends had this to say about the elves. If a mortal being dares come near them, they open their mouths, and struck by the breath which escapes from it, the imprudent fellow dies poisoned. On October 7, 1954, Mr. Margalion saw an object which had landed in a field in Montreux, France. If I pronounce that right. It was shaped like a hemisphere, about 2.5 yards in diameter. The witnesses gasped for air and fell paralyzed during the observation. The sudden lack of air noted in the Cisco Grove case is not infrequently reported by witnesses of landings, nor are the peculiar eyes of the small entities reddish orange and glowing in the dark. On October 9, 1954, in Laux, Vienna, France, a farmer who was riding his bicycle suddenly stopped as he saw a figure dressed in a sort of diving suit aiming a double light beam at him. The individual, who seemed to have boots without heels, very bright eyes, and a very hairy chest, carried 2 headlights, one below the other, on front of his suit. 9 days later, in Fontenay-Torcy, also in France, a man and his wife reported that they saw a red cigar-shaped object in the sky. All of a sudden, it dived towards them, leaving a reddish trail, and landed behind some bushes. Upon reaching the top of the hill, the witness found themselves confronted by a bulky individual, human in appearance but only about 3 feet tall. He wore a helmet and his eyes glowed with a orange light. One of the witnesses lost consciousness. 4 other people saw the object in flight from other spot. A third group of independent witnesses in another town, and this is San Soila Poitre saw a craft fly away at tremendous speed in a westerly direction. The countryside was illuminated over the air 1 or 2 miles wide. It is indeed appropriate to tell the man who investigates such cases, in the words of Robert Herrick, her eyes, the glow worms led thee, the shooting stars and thee, and the else also, whose little eyes glow like the sparks of fire, befriend thee. And so the next section, the next time we read, will be to Magonia and back. And this is why the book is called Passport to Magonia.
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you're going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
Don't know, you should take it slow. Are you searching? Is it hard to find? If you're broken, running out of time, what you don't have is any peace of seasons don't change who we are. The good is gone, but there's nowhere to go. If I can't go, will you take me there? I won't break, I feel. Seasons don't change who we are. The good is gone, but there's nowhere to go. Seasons don't change